Good evening and welcome to the Missoula Public Library. I'm Dennis Bragg, and we're here with Wednesdays with the Mayor. Mayor Andrea Davis is with us. Good to see you. It's been a busy week, a busy day, I know, and we're pleased to have you with us tonight to talk about topics. I want to mention right off the top that we have a nice audience here tonight, and if you have a question in the audience, you can write that down, and we'll also run around with the microphone a la Phil Donahue here a little bit later on to get your questions as well. And if you're watching tonight online with MCAT, the number to call if you do have a question is 406-546-7692, 546-7692. So call in with those questions as we go. I want to always give a thanks to Scott and Ron and everybody from MCAT, and of course for Missoula Public Library for allowing us to host these programs. So tonight we're going to talk about land banking.
Yeah.
And on the surface of it, some of our eyes may glaze over and think, oh, it's banking, it must be complicated. This is actually a real unique approach to planning and to being able to meet some of our objectives for housing and all kinds of things. Let's talk a little bit about land banking and what that kind of the concept is and how that's used here in Missoula.
Excellent. Okay, everybody can hear me all right. Sounds like the mic's working. Thanks,
Yes.
Dennis. First of all, thank you all so much for being here this evening. It's great to see the amount of folks here for a conversation. Land banking, first of all, Missoula did not invent this. This is certainly something that other communities have used, and we have incorporated through our different publicly informed planning processes, such as our housing strategy, which is called A Place to Call Home. All of this, by the way, is located on our website if there's any time you want to be able to see what the details are. The idea behind it is that we have the opportunity to acquire properties that are opportunities for various things, whether it is property that would allow us to connect streets and a grid system, whether it be an opportunity to purchase land in order to redevelop it to meet a housing strategy, like I said, or a redevelopment strategy. The north side, west side is a good example of a community-led plan where there identifies opportunities to build mixed-use retail opportunities, but without the land being available, then it's sort of a hope and a dream. But when the opportunity arises and we can acquire the land, make sure that there is infrastructure, and really prepare it then, ideally for our for-profit partners to participate and help redevelop that. An example is right next door at the old library block. That was a unique opportunity because of the circumstance with the new library where we had the person that owned this land swap and then actually donate that old library to the city. That is a really cool thing. What that enabled us to do is go out and seek developers that meet the goals associated, again, with a community-led plan. And in this case, it's the Missoula Downtown Master Plan. And that Missoula Downtown Master Plan calls for things like mixed use, retail, housing, childcare located downtown. Again, these are all awesome goals. We can certainly put it out there and we can ask the private sector, can you please help achieve these? When we have the land, ultimately, we're able to then partner with the private sector. We can help with the infrastructure and such, and then the private sector can actually help build these things.
And really those acquisition opportunities come from a variety of sources. That's why there's no single particular thing you say, this is what we do all the time, because it can vary according to the size of the site, the location, the ownership matrix. There are a lot of things to take into account, and so it's just a tool that can be brought out and used in a variety of ways, right?
That is correct. That is correct, exactly. I mean, communities land bank for things like when you know you need to expand something like, for example, this is not an appropriate example for Missoula because the City of Missoula is not responsible for our transit system. In a lot of communities, the transit system is actually part of the city government. In Missoula, it's actually a standalone jurisdiction. But for example, if we are in this situation right now where Mountain Line has really expanded its service, it's definitely what the community has asked for and wanted. And you can imagine, they keep adding buses to this tiny little, I don't know if you all know where they're located, but they're up on Shakespeare Street, tucked in a neighborhood against the railroad tracks, and they have literally nowhere to park all their buses. And buses are coming in out of a regular residential neighborhood. That's another good example of, hey, we may need to recognize that there is an expansion of a infrastructure or utility, and acquiring large acreage like that, especially in a place like Missoula that is so land constrained for various reasons, is another reason to try to take advantage of opportunities that come along because they don't come along very often. The other thing that I'd love to add about this is that what we've been actively involved in is reactivating property that did not have, that wasn't able to be used anymore. And what I mean by that is like old industrial wasteland, for lack of a better word. The Champion Mill site was one of those sites. I mean, many people, I'm looking around the room, you remember that 45-acre site that sat empty for years and years and years and years, decades. Complicated ownership structure, wasn't even in the city of Missoula. And it had enormous cleanup requirements in order to bring it up to residential standards. But literally, quite literally, is in the middle of the valley. And meanwhile, we have people that are asking through our other planning processes, please save our farmland. Please make it so we have walkable neighborhoods. Well, when you have 45 acres in the middle of your community, that is an opportunity to say, how do we reinvigorate that land? Another example is the White Pine and Sash.
White Pine Sash, right.
Over Scott Street. That literally was industrial wasteland. It was not able to be built on for residential standards until the neighborhood and the city and others brought that forward to the Department of Environmental Quality and were able to get it cleaned up. But it would have sat there as basically just empty space.
Yeah, fallow space, right.
So we have the opportunity to use land that, 100 years ago, right, when these were actually, when our community was such a different size and different economy and all sorts of different things. But we can actually reactivate that space for reinvigorated parts of our community.
And one thing that's interesting, and just kind of a side note on that, is a lot of times I've seen communities be able to do that, and because of the government involvement, right, or that what agencies will see as oversight, if you will, the EPA or whoever may look at that and say, okay, but it's not a purely private endeavor here. So there are, sometimes they will waive or exempt or work with a municipality to be able to redevelop a site just because there is that involvement.
Exactly. The thing that the city of Missoula does have a program that accesses federal dollars through the, I think there's a little troll in there that's
We're
trying
laughing.
to get out.
You probably can't hear that on MCAT, but all of us here in the room, where it's like, yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Somebody's working on the pipes.
Right. So I was going to mention the Brownfield program. It's a program that's under the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's been around for a while. That it is both available to the private sector as well as the public sector. But municipalities like Missoula have taken on that commitment for our community to administer these funds. It's all underneath the EPA. It starts at the EPA at the federal level, and the Department of Environmental Quality. These dollars flow through to a municipality like the city where we can have a revolving loan fund. And there are ways that we can work with the private sector to repurpose land that has cleanup needs. Like I mentioned earlier, an industrial site that used chemicals 70 years ago. We just didn't know, right, that we were poisoning the soil with these things. And there's opportunity to utilize those brownfield funds. Sometimes when it's a nonprofit and it would be for a community good, like permanently affordable homes, it can actually be a grant. In some cases, it's a loan to the private sector, that is the case with the old sawmill district where we had a private sector partner. We went through a really long process alongside them to go about doing a really massive cleanup on that site in order to actually have buildable space again. And
that gives, and the EPA, just as an example, or DOE, they'll oftentimes use the city as sort of that agent to make that happen and provide those dollars available, those kinds of things. Yeah. Let's talk about also, not all properties are a block or a couple of blocks or acreage. Sometimes it's more linear, and I think of some of the Montana Rail Link corridor and some of those changes that have been taking place in more recent years. That's another example of this, right?
It sure is, and I'm sure for folks listening on MCAT and those in the audience know that the Missoula, the Washington Corporation and the Missoula Rail Link has sold to Burlington Northern. And so the land that is currently in ownership with the Washington Corp or Missoula Rail Link likely can and will be repurposed. They still have a right-of-way, but they've been working with the city of Missoula. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but there have been railroad tracks that we have taken out of some of our major thoroughfares because, as you know, this asphalt chips around all of that, the line, and it causes a lot of potholes and such. So like on West Broadway next to Yoke's grocery store, there used to be a rail right there. That's been taken out. Or also right next to Boyce Lumber, that's been taken out and just asphalted over. Now the right-of-way is still there, but there is a really long corridor going all the way through Missoula connecting the Bitterroot. And there is an opportunity for us to possibly repurpose that into a greenway. Maybe the rail link, Missoula Rail line will want to continue to have a right-of-way, because maybe they'll put a rail back in there one day. But in the meantime, it could be a cool trail. So that would be something where we would also have to, use cleanup dollars. We would, of course, you always assess the soil to know what you need to clean up. And then have the opportunity again to, maybe in that case, we're land banking through a lease or something.
And I want to stress, too, that oftentimes when you talk about these cleanups, it's not always, we're not talking about Superfund level, hazardous waste, those kinds of things. Oftentimes it can be something as simple as, PCB contamination from transformers or something that is a fairly easy fix, but you've got to get, something for the future of the property taken care of there. So
Asbestos and lead-based paint.
exactly. Let's also talk about one, and we'll get back to this a little bit, but one that's come up more recently is what I always call kind of the Lambros properties. So we're talking adjacent over by, be on the southwest edge of Southgate Mall. And I know there had been some expressions, Peter Lambros himself, I can remember doing a story with him probably, I'll say 2016, 17, when they were doing a lot of new investment on the mall, when he and his partners owned that. And they were talking about doing some, residential development, those kind of things adjacent to that Bitterroot line. Talk a little bit about that. I know there's been some discussion coming up, and we can come back on this topic, but just generally.
Well, yeah, that is the city's newest, I would say, land banking opportunity. However, this has been in process for probably, easily 20 years. And this is property that is basically southwest of Bob Ward's. And so in between Bob Ward's retail and Highway Tanner Brooks. And this is an area this is a good example where there are old platted. Well, first of all, there are two ownership groups. One is the Beach family. And as you know, the Beach family runs a very large school bus company.
Beach transportation.
And they
right.
own property all over the community. And they have land banked themselves for the eventual expansion. It's been in conversation over the years, most recently through the Midtown Association's master plan to that site has been identified, both the Beach family site as well as it's a group of owners affiliated with the Lambros family, but it's a whole
right.
group of investors that own that two sections adjacent, yeah.
Parcels, yeah.
10 acres in total. But it's a bunch of platted lots that there is no way in which it would create a connected grid. And the opportunity to help meet the Midtown Master Plan is to acquire all 10 acres. So we were fortunate, our relationship through the Missoula Economic Partnership, that's the city and the county, as well as many businesses that are members of the Missoula Economic Partnership. We utilize the Missoula Economic Partnership to help us be able to navigate land opportunities, and they work with the private sector to be able to negotiate some of these things. And while this has been on the radar for literally 2 decades, the opportunity has come forward. And so the city did put a purchase and sale agreement forward with both ownership groups. And we're in the middle of due diligence now, which what we just talked about is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that the soil is, if there's any cleanup, we know what we need to do. And what that will do is it will enable us to master plan that site so we can actually have north and south connection, because right now it's a huge blockade. You cannot drive from South Avenue to Brook Street in that corridor space. So we'll connect all of that in order to create more of a neighborhood. But it also, what the city will do is basically, we will basically retire some unnecessary right-of-ways, and we will create the right kind of grid system that will create roads, it will create sidewalks, it will create parks, and then buildable space for the private sector to come in and actually be able to build the retail, the commercial, and the housing that has been planned as part of the Midtown Association's master plan.
And that's that reconfiguration opportunities that we talk about with land banking. It's like saying, okay, it may have been this, or it may have been planned this, or there's ownerships, but there's there's a grid, like you say in that case, access. How do we then take that and make it sort of open the door for that eventual private opportunities?
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Okay. I summarized it well. See,
did,
you
you-
explained it well, but my summary was based on your explanation, so there you go. Let's talk a little bit about more information, and let's talk about the funding aspects of this a little bit, because I think this is something that a lot of folks, they look at that and talk a little bit about how this works then with different funding opportunities when you do have a private developer come along. And talk about generally, and then we'll talk with some of the staff that are here too a bit that a little further.
So absolutely, because there are experts in the room
Right.
that will be able to answer this and provide information better than I can. The majority of the areas that we're able to do this in are the urban renewal districts. Urban renewal districts are a mechanism through the state of Montana in terms of legislation for a local municipality to be able to address areas that are traditionally, and this is the technical language, but that are disinvestment, that there is blight, then that also means that is lacking substantial infrastructure. And what that means is that you generally have then a lack of private investment that wants to come in and build their office space or build their mixed use
And oftentimes that is related to costs. You may have a developer that would like to do something on the site, but boy, if there's stormwater problems, if there's deep infrastructure issues, lack of access, that can really make it not pencil out for them.
And what'll end up happening a lot of times in these cases is that we have substantial buildings that will actually go out and build in green space. So this is where we have multiple initiatives, requests, expectations from the community. The community wants to see us be able to have our space utilized on the interior of our urban core, rather than, let's say, a large bank going out on the way to the airport. Now, eventually, of course, town is growing. However, if we're able to use the urban renewal districts, so that you asked me about the financing, and so sorry to jump around there. Urban renewal districts basically create, like, if you can think about a border where it establishes what the tax base is of that particular district, and it is based entirely on what state law determines as far as how you determine what is blight in areas that need redevelopment. And then you are bonding for a project that, so the opportunity, like where Kmart was, that's a really good example of
Perfect
that area.
example of that.
We needed there's been a traffic light need where Door Lane is for a long time. That's another good example, and some other improvements along there. The development that went in where Kohl's is and all that now, where the old Kmart was, remember, I mean, it sat vacant for a long time. And I think this is where I think people assume, like, well, won't development just come in and do this? And the reality is that we really needed to get in there and try to help with some traffic calming, planning, and that project was bonded to then help build that, some public infrastructure related. So tax increment financing is the public infrastructure related to private development. So it's not going in to the bricks and mortar of Kohl's, but it is going into the public, it is going into the sewer, water that benefits the rest of that community, the sidewalks around that, roads, curbs, all that type of stuff. And the stoplight that is now on Door Lane. As the tax base rises in that particular urban renewal district, if there is excess from paying off the bond, which is basically a loan, to help with all of that infrastructure, then that can be utilized for things like land banking. And so it further promotes the plans associated in that urban renewal district. So it continues the reinvestment in that area. It can also be used in more infrastructure.
And we might get Ellen Buchanan in here to answer that, but also the question I've always wondered, how, and people have asked me this, and I don't know the answer, is those TIF funds and those opportunities, are those tied specifically to each of those URDs, each of those urban renewal districts?
Yes, they are. So every urban renewal district is more or less, by state law, this is a requirement that you utilize tax increment financing investment within that urban renewal district. So the dollars associated with the Urban Renewal District 3, which is where the Coles development is in Door Lane, those dollars cannot be used in this part of town, and that's not by our choice. That is dictated by state law.
I know that question.
I'm correct on
Is
everything
that
over here.
correct?
This thought,
Okay.
just checking, making sure.
We'll have Ellie come up here and we'll dive in a little further. I just want to make sure that, in our initial discussion, we have that because, yeah, on South Crossing in particular, that question came up. It was like, how's this work? But it was a prime
Complex.
example of in particular, I mean, I can think of a lot of the problems that were solved there. That Door Lane thing, I mean, gee, the number of fatal accidents that I covered there over a period of years as that corridor got more busy, that was really a problem. But also just for pedestrian traffic and everything, to be able to go back and forth and, the parking lot was changed. I mean, that's a really remarkable change. In fact, I was looking for another story. I was looking at my old pictures of the Kmart, what was left of Kmart, and it was like, boy, that changed a lot.
It sure did. I mean, I never biked in that area. I never crossed that area on my bicycle until that light went in.
Yeah,
and that just is a good example.
I would always avoid Door Lane. It was like, I am not going down there. I've seen too many problems. I want to touch on this, and then we'll kind of get to where we can go to questions here.
Great.
But we talk about meeting city goals, and I want to make sure we emphasize how land banking ties in to meeting some of those things, and whether that's diversity, it's those kinds of goals, all of that. How does this really help achieve those opportunities?
Well, there's several city goals, which again, city goals are always publicly informed when we talk about our growth policy, A Place to Call Home, which is our housing strategy, our long-term transportation plan, which we're in the middle of an update right now, and we have a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy within our strategic plan. Land banking achieves each of these because we are able to purchase land that ends up, as we are able to bring that land into developable space, we have the opportunity to use it as a carrot. So an example is we own the old library, and we're able to utilize that development opportunity to achieve goals. So if we're saying, an example is, we really want to see childcare downtown, and it's a very difficult economic proposition for any childcare provider to make. As you all know, it is, people aren't making a killing doing that line of work. Costs of development are very high. So it's not like we see new childcare providers popping up downtown, but we have people that live in this area, we have people that work in this area, and it would certainly help benefit the families if there was better early childhood care development, which, by the way, we're using the old library for that right now. It's really cool. It's called Home Base. It's part of the Parks and Recs department. It's our temporary use of that space. It's really neat. But because we have control, basically, of the space, we can help direct some of our goals. And again, the goal of the Midtown Master Plan is to have more services available to people that are living and working and retiring right in this area. And so that's how we're able to achieve those things. Another is our climate goal. And so being able to utilize a development plan. The city, over time, has learned it doesn't want to overly prescribe what needs to be built somewhere, because the private developer is going to be able to come in and be able to, through public process, best articulate a development plan that will meet our community goals. And in a space like this where we've got mixed use and we have the opportunity for people to live, work, and play in one place, it meets our equity goals, and it meets our climate goals, it meets housing goals. And again, hopefully, childcare is all, underlying all of that.
So if I were, for example, somebody was in that line of work, and maybe I had some other folks that were together, maybe we've been to a bank, and the bank looks at you and says, there's no way you're going to develop an independent site or something like that. That gives you the opportunity to then work with someone like that who says, we'd love to do this, here's our plan, here's what we've got going on, but maybe, going out and buying another building or another site or something, that opportunity is just not there. So working with them to meet those goals is really what the objective is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay.
You bet.
And one other question on that, are there any specific percentages or numbers or goals or thresholds that we look at when it comes to how much land is banked?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head when I think about the affordable housing plan. I don't think we've identified anything in terms of acreage.
Okay.
We've identified what we've talked about today are the overarching goals for why we would purchase land, why we would bank land. The city is, as folks in this room know, after acquiring the water system, we have other parts of town that are now in our ownership as well. Some of that will make sense for us to continue to be able to provide utility service into the long run, but the other may be now available for other uses. But we do not have any numeric goals associated with like the amount of land that
Okay, there's like not a maximum or a minimum number at this point. Okay, good. All right, well, let's get the MRA in here. And Ellen, I'm going to have, what camera do we want to be on? If we stand off the side, guys, you got that? Ellen, come on up here. I think we'll go on, do you want us on this camera, Ron? Okay.
Do you want me to take my mic off? Or?
No, just stand here and Ellen and I will just talk for a second. Right here. No, just stand here and face this. There we go.
I get to just kick
well,
back.
you don't have to. So, well, Ellen, tell me a little bit about MRA's involvement then in land banking, and how does this sort of work, and how has it worked with, you know, the mayor gave a couple of examples, but how has it really been a tool for the Missoula Redevelopment Agency?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things is that the urban renewal districts probably have the most opportunity for land banking, because that's where land is underutilized, or you wouldn't have an urban renewal district there. So we're, to a great extent, we're opportunity driven. If there's a parcel that comes available that is difficult to develop, and that the city has goals that they can achieve by guiding that development, and if we have the resources in that district, then we're in a position to purchase that property. We've been working more recently with the Missoula Economic Partnership to help us identify, or to help us gain the ability to purchase some properties that we've looked at for years. As the mayor pointed out, the property behind Bob Ward's, we've funded 2 master planning efforts on that, but never been able to kind of get it developed. And now, if everything goes well during this due diligence period and we're able to purchase the property, we'll have the opportunity to do that. And you know, we can, the city has very specific goals. The Midtown Master Plan, which has been adopted by the City Council as part of the growth policy, lays out some goals for the reuse of that land, and it's been fallow for 40 or better years now. So
Is there any specific emphasis on a certain type of land that might be used in land bank from that redevelopment aspect of things? I mean, do we favor, you know, a commercial potential, retail, housing, or is it really kind of the spectrum?
Well, I think, you know, you can't have a conversation about development in the city without talking about housing. That's our #1 priority. But we emphasize mixed use and housing. I mean, we're trying to do everything we can to combat sprawl, to combat segregation of uses, so that you don't have to get in your car every time you need to go and you know, buy a carton of milk or something. Mm-hmm. So, you know, those are the sorts of things we look for. If a piece of property is easily developed by the private sector, giddy up, that's exactly who should develop it. But something like that property behind Bob Ward's is not going to necessarily be easy to develop by the private sector. It's large, it has no infrastructure, it's been used as a site, it started out as a lumber business, so you have wood waste there, which it can be an issue. You have construction debris that's been dumped there over the years. There are a lot of impediments to the private sector coming in and being able to pull off a redevelopment in that area, particularly in today's situation, where you've got interest rates that are higher than we're accustomed to. You've got construction costs continuing to escalate. You have labor challenges in the construction business. So that's a perfect example of where tax increment is such an important economic development tool. I mean, we can create job opportunities there. We can create housing there. There's a huge lack of green space and parkland in the Midtown area. A park will definitely be a part of the redevelopment of that.
And that fits in. I mean, I referenced that earlier conversation I had with Peter Lambros, and at that point he was talking about, you know, some of the redevelopment they were doing at the mall. He said eventually this other side has to go, because it really ties in with the trends of people wanting to live, work, and be in the place, maybe not even own a car, but be adjacent to those kinds of things. So this seems like that kind of opportunity.
Well, I think it is, and I think, another one, for instance, when MRL was willing to sell the property at Johnson and North Avenue at a very discounted price, if it hadn't been in an urban renewal district with the resources, the city didn't have an extra $2 million sitting around that they could spend that on out of the general fund. We provided the funding for it. We can't own property as an agency. The city owns it. We're a component unit of the city. But that is an opportunity that I don't know that we could have taken advantage of at all as a city had there not been an urban renewal district with the resources.
And
I know we couldn't do the property behind Bob Ward's without that.
And a final question on that too, when it comes to the administration of those, and the mayor talked about this, about how those different TIF accounts, if you will, are tied to the different urban renewal districts. Are they all sort of standing alone, as they will, and on their own merits, and talk a little bit about the independence of those different TIF accounts?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think a lot of times you hear people try to paint TIF and urban renewal districts with a single brush, if you will. We have 6 urban renewal districts in Missoula, and they couldn't be more different from each other. Some have a lot of resources, some have almost no resources, some are seeing incredible investment, some are not, some are very small, some are very large. But the way the tool works, whatever increment, and the increment is whatever taxes are generated as a result of somebody building a new building, adding on to a building, improving their property after the district has been created, those resources go into a special fund, and they can only be spent within the boundary of that urban renewal district. So we can't take, as the mayor pointed out, we can't take money from the Midtown district and spend it on the downtown district, no matter how badly we need that money in the downtown. Downtown's got to take care of itself. But the other thing that's often lost in the discussion around TIF is that if you look at the downtown and you look at the improvements that have happened here because of the first urban renewal district, which was created in 1978, over that period of time, we generated we put $20 million in TIF funding back into the district, and we leveraged over $200 million. This downtown is what it is today because there was an urban renewal district created there. But it's those big projects that we often get criticized for supporting, like the Merck Hotel, like the banks that have chosen to develop downtown. Those are what generate the revenue that let us build trails, let us build parks, let us build sidewalks in lower income neighborhoods without it being a burden on the renters or the property owners. We don't have those funds unless those private sector dollars are invested. And the TIF availability is what allows those projects to be better, to meet the city standards that we want to see met, that we can't regulate necessarily. And they generate the funds that build the amenities that we all love in downtown Missoula and all over Missoula.
Ellen, thank you very much. All right. Mayor, when we talk about this, I mean, that is she mentioned this number from 78 to now. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable number. I think of, if the city or even a private developer went out and said, we're going to make 20 million go to 200 million or so, that's a pretty big number. That's something to be proud of, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, as 2005. Okay.
Wow.
So that's just from 78 to 2005. So that's even more interesting. So let's go ahead and open it up for questions, Sue. And if you're watching on MCAT Live, you can give us a call at 406-546-7692. 406-546-7692. If you have a question, go ahead and call us on that. And if you're in the audience, again, if you think of something as we go along, write a note and we'll get you in there. But just opening up, do we have any questions here at this point? Good. Let's stand up and have you say your name here. And we'll kind of, let me get on the other side of here without spilling the coffee. You're okay. All right, good. Go ahead and give us your name, please.
I'm Mary von Hoffman.
Okay.
And it's not so much a question as just a thrill that we might have light rail in Missoula. You were mentioning the rails that were still, the right-of-way was still there. I mean, my dream for decades has been to have light rail going all the way down to Darby. When 93 was expanded, I was wishing for that, and it's been a long time since. Yeah. So I think that would be, it would solve so much to have that. So we would have a mart, Missoula Rapid Transit
I
Authority.
like it. You've
Well, she's
named
already
it.
named it. I appreciate that. Thank you. Appreciate that.
It's not the Mary Rapid Transit, right?
No,
It's,
no.
Okay.
But I think that brings up an interesting point, because when you talk about that, those are kinds of opportunities that may today seem like, wow, this is really a long ways. How do we even visualize that? How do we fund it? But that's what land banking would allow you to do, is to be able to set something aside, whether it's that or a similar long range thing, right?
Exactly. I mean, that area, we have been working collaboratively with all of the businesses and folks that are involved with the Midtown Association, and considering how Brook Street can be repurposed to a more urban type of environment, because it was developed when Missoula was building out, and it's a very suburban type development. It's a highway, right? There is a safety concern. We as a community and as a city are obligated to figure out how we create a more safe environment, and how are we creating more spaces where there can be more homes that are built that are either rentals or home ownership that are affordable to people that can live and work, walk and drive to that space. So while rapid transit, and that is a big lift because of the amount of money that's required, however, there are opportunities to continue looking on to that in the future. In the meantime, we're also looking at bus rapid transit along Brook Street that would allow for, because Mountain Line does not run up and down Brook Street right now, and they don't do it because they don't want to, they do it because they can't. It is not safe for the bus to run up and down Mountain Line, to run up and down Brooks. But you think about it and you go like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a big arterial and there's all these businesses, and wouldn't it be beneficial if we could do that? And so bus rapid transit, whether it's a segregated line or not, and it might not be a rail line, but it's a bus line that enables people to move up and down that corridor, and people can be car free. In right now, I mean, of course, Mountain Line is fare free, and so people can get on and be able to access what could be a completely revitalized area. And that's long-term planning for us, right? This is not going to be overnight, but that's why we start to think about these things now, and as we consider what that might mean for the community, and then as it connects with our neighboring communities. I mean, Lolo is its own community, but in 30 years, what will this area look like, right? And that's the kind of thing that we need to maybe consider.
If we had them before,
We had 'em
trolleys.
before.
Well, if you get
Yes,
to that
that's
point,
right.
let me know, Mayor, because I know a fellow in Washington. In fact, I rode on his system. This has been 20-some years ago now. Maglev, unpowered, and the state of Washington wouldn't even give him the time of day. So I'll put you in touch with him. I've always thought we have the perfect scale for at least a pilot project along those lines.
Cool.
Any other questions here? Let's open it up. Anybody else? Yes. Go ahead and stand up. Sure. Go ahead and stand up so we can
Please.
get this. Go ahead.
My name is Kay. But going back to where you were talking about the library, the old library, and it's being used for childcare right now and run by the Parks Department?
The Parks Department is utilizing the space with others, and I don't want to misspeak because I believe there's other private partners, but we're using it as a way to provide after-school care. And there's also an organization there that provides schooling for kids that are living with autism, and they have the opportunity to use that space for basically, I think it's a full-time school, actually. But yeah, they're also using it for after-school care there right now.
Are those covered under the city taxes, or is that county, or is it both?
Well, that is a really good question. I'm going to look around at my peers. We don't provide childcare as like a subsidized.
I didn't think so.
No, I mean, we're just basically using it as the space and programming it, like we do for all of the services that we, like, for example, in parks, when we are running, children's programs or sports programs, there are fee-based programs that help stand that up, but we more or less help connect kids with recreation opportunities. Another good use of that space, okay, Snow Bowl had a really bad snow year, and there are coaches that needed to do something with their kids because there were basically ski camps this year that couldn't ski. So that space was utilized by a private group that came in and was able to utilize that space to help those kids still connect kinesthetically with the kinds of skills they were learning when they were in ski camp. Not to the taxpayer, but it was in partnership with that private group, but we basically are helping create the space. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And again, that's a temporary situation,
It
right?
is.
Where
It is.
as we develop a long-term plan for that site, this is the type of multi-use that we just take advantage of opportunities as they come along and help out where we can.
It's a real need that we have in the community. That is something that's another whole conversation, which is indoor recreation space. We are a really outdoor recreation focused community, and that is awesome. But there are a lot of people that don't do outdoor recreation. And it is something we certainly hear about, but it is definitely a consideration around, like, how would we fund it? And so I am not proposing anything right now, but I do say that's an example of something that people are clamoring for, because we have opportunities to think about how we use indoor space to help kids be active and be connected. And I think we all know that that is really a concern amongst a lot of us. We see it in research all over the country in terms of youth and mental health and the ability to be active and be connected. And so, who knows, maybe there'll be a partnership with the schools someday where we can do something like that.
I'm curious about one thing too, and I think about where the parameters are for land banking. So as you were talking about, we talked about skiing, brought to my mind the Marshall Mountain situation would not have been a land banked opportunity because that's outside the city. That was a different, well, the scenario is different, but something like that would not be a land banking thing. We're talking about stuff within the city limits, right?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, 100%. In that case, that is in the county, and it was purchased through the open space bond proceeds.
Right.
And the county and the city both use their open space proceeds to purchase that.
Yeah, and that was specific to open space, whereas land banking is a redevelopment tool, right?
That is correct, exactly.
Yeah. Okay,
exactly.
good enough. And I also think of one other thing. This came up, I think it was before the pandemic. We may have talked about this before, but I recall Missoula County Public Schools was also looking through a lot of their properties and saying, we own different things. They have a beautiful piece up on the hill, South Hills there, that they said, we're never going to build a school up here. And I don't know where they're at, but what about working with, whether it's MCPS, whether it's county, other governmental entities? How would land banking, could it be used as a tool in those kinds of situations?
That is an excellent question, and something, Fort Missoula Park is a really good example where we may have the opportunity to utilize, let's just say that Fort Missoula Park was within an urban renewal district, okay? Mm-hmm. We could think about how we bring infrastructure to that site. We would have to have the proceeds from it. As Ellen spoke to earlier, it's why the larger commercial projects have to happen in these urban renewal districts. So basically there's revenue generated to then put infrastructure. But this is very realistic. Missoula has, as many and most all Montana communities have been built out in ways that there is not consistent infrastructure, even in the middle of town. So River Road neighborhood is a really good example of that. There are just places where there are no water lines, and in some places there's still septic. And so in that case, let's say, for example, we would partner with the county, the city, on a large regional park, and maybe potentially we would be able to use, in theory, our resources to help facilitate that. We did not in that case, but that's another example of something like that.
Want to point out something too before we're out of time, because this is pretty important. In 2021, the legislature changed Montana law to address this issue of workforce housing, which is really a whole nother complicated topic. But speak a little bit about the relationship between land banking and this fairly newer effort when it comes to workforce housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Workforce housing, I think this is one of those nebulous terms that people are like, what do you mean by that? And every community has the opportunity to define it themselves. And as you said, the legislature in 2021 expanded the urban renewal district legislation to allow for tax increment financing to actually fund the bricks and mortar of workforce housing. And it took until 2023 to get some further definition to that, because the legislature recognized that we have been having such an incredible challenge with our housing market. We lack resources in this state significantly for how we can put equity, cash, and to make these things happen. And so land banking, a good example of how this works is that the city was able, through the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, to purchase the old White Pine Sash site, or most of it, a big chunk of it, and help bring that property back into residential standards. And then the master planning took place. Of course, this was all over the pandemic. But in that time, we also had the
You
opportunity.
got some work done.
We got some work done.
Yeah.
And the legislature made that change where not only can we use tax increment financing to build infrastructure, which again is sewer, water, sidewalks, curb, parks, but we can now create a workforce housing program, a policy to actually build the bricks and mortar. Well, what does that mean for us as a community? And I think about affordable homes, whether they're rental or whether they're for home ownership, thinking about that also as infrastructure. Infrastructure for the people that live and work here, because we need to use those precious public dollars for affordable homes into the perpetuity. And so what we did on that site was work with a private partner, Rivera Development, and we have a couple of phases of going in, but the city was able to acquire the land, work on getting it to its current status, which is residential standards, and then now the Missoula Redevelopment Agency will be able to do its classic use of tax increment financing, which is putting in the infrastructure. So again, it's sewer and water and roads and sidewalks. And then we are partnering with Rivera to build 90 community land trust homes in the first phase, and 45 of them will be income restricted. Workforce housing, in our definition, in the city's adopted housing policy and in the MRA's workforce housing policy, is in the city's housing policy, it's 80% of the area median income to 120% of the area median income. And I am sorry to get wonky on this, but I have no choice. Because the dollars that our private partners have been able to utilize, and I worked for one of those private partners for a long time. I used to be the executive director of Homeward. It's a nonprofit organization that builds homes that Montanans can afford. And the kind of financing that we could acquire generally would be capped at people earning 60% of the area median income or below, or 80% or below for home ownership. And our housing market has just soared beyond anything that we can really do for people that are, let's say, you know, an entry-level police officer at $60,000 a year cannot buy a house in Missoula. I personally want the police and fire to live in the community by which they are protecting and providing first response. That's what this program does. Those are the incomes solidly within that income tier. And thank goodness the legislature recognized that and enabled the Missoula Redevelopment Agency to utilize tax increment financing. So we're building 45 income-restricted condos, basically in townhomes, and then 90 will be market rate. And what I mean by a community land trust, and this is where it's affordable into perpetuity, is that the land is owned in a trust with North Missoula Community Development Corporation, and this will be their 6th land trust. So that the land is held in trust, and the purchaser only buys the home. And that, when you take the land cost out, that really does help the affordability quotient. And so there'll be multiple tiers of price points there. And the portion that is assisted with the tax increment financing will have long-term affordability. And that is the quid pro quo that we have as taxpayers, because that's an investment we're making as taxpayers. So not only will that area be brought back to, because in the second phase is 200 plus market rate homes that we're not using that workforce housing fund. So not only is that now part of the tax base, there will be people living there, but we will have, as a community, deed-restricted homes into perpetuity there.
And one of the objectives I've heard on this too, and let me back up, we heard it again with the Missoula Organization of Realtors with their report, showed again, in fact I asked them specifically about that, showed again we're not getting, and migration's not the right word, there's a technical term, but people moving from one level of housing up to another,
Right.
or down, either way.
That's right.
there's not a lot of transition housing going on because people are afraid and I can't afford something new, I can't do this. So I know in the housing objectives, workforce especially, but that's one of the concepts here that we're trying to support, right?
Absolutely.
So people can, maybe they're, income restricted to begin with. As they get on their feet, they can move up and do something different and those kind of things, right?
Exactly. And there are a lot of people that are considered overhoused. And
Yeah.
so there are people that are living in their home because they have no adequate place. They don't want to sell their 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the slant state districts because where do they want to move?
Where are they going to go?
Where are they going to go? And so this is what we call the missing middle. I think I saw a question over here.
Yeah. Go ahead and stand up for a second. Oh, yeah. We're at that point now. This is the topic. But yeah, if you got another question, go ahead. Go ahead and stand up for a second.
Jack, the question that I have been trying to get answered is, and not in this meeting, of course, but previous to this, starting April 1st, there's a new ordinance that goes in place for everybody in the Rattlesnake and Grant Creek, the first phase, to have a bear-resistant, not proof, because that doesn't exist, bear-resistant garbage can. Will those garbage cans be provided, and will they be in everyone who is a client of one of these two vendors in Missoula? Will those garbage cans be replaced before April 30th?
Oh my gosh, there's an expert in the back of the room.
Jenny, come on up here because it's funny. We were talking about just before the meeting, Jack. So I think this will be our turn around, Jenny, so we can face the camera here.
Sorry.
So because we were just talking about this, Jack. I think this is going to be our topic here coming up this next month. But give us a quick answer on that or where we're at, Jenny.
New health board regulations start in Grant Creek and the Rattlesnake on April 30th. It requires every home or business to have a bear-resistant garbage container. Those are to be supplied by the garbage haulers. So we have 2, Republic or Grizzly. Probably not before the 30th because it's such a big task. They will probably start around the end of the month, but the goal of this project is not to trick people and fine them and put them in jail or anything like that. It is to help us to live better with bears, stop drawing bears into our neighborhoods. And so we will wait until after those are put into place before there's any kind of enforcement.
Question, but since the thing was adopted April 3rd or October 3rd or 8th, right? It was last fall. Now we're going to wait till the 30th. That seems a little odd to me, since we've had all that time. They've known.
They have, but there have been, and we know this because at least Republic, and I don't have the history with Grizzly, has worked in other communities that have become Bear Smart communities. And Whitefish, Republic turned over, they require it in their entire city all at once, and it took them months because of supply chain issues with the bear-resistant garbage carts. So we wanted to make sure that they had enough time to be able to get the carts.
And that's something that I know we had a meeting of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee that was back, I want to say it was probably 2021 or 22 when Whitefish first started to talk about this. And a lot of the vendors were saying, we can't get these cans. And so I think there is that, like I say, moving us in a direction that may not happen on a deadline day necessarily because of some of those issues.
I think it's better for them now that there is more availability as COVID recedes and that kind of thing, but still. And that's why we also are phasing it in. So part of those new health department regulations is that the bear buffer zone, which is around the city and out into the county, that's part of the reason that we phased it in different parts of that zone. And Potomac.
Getting at is if we don't have some deadlines and we don't have some goals, then how are we going to achieve them? Because I'm looking at, here's the first phase, and then the second phase doesn't get implemented for a year. So I would think the first phase is going to go slowly, but the second phase, when that day rolls around, every one of those cans should be switched over, you know? I mean, with this much notice, unless there's a plastic shortage somewhere or whatever, and the suppliers to the actual vendors can't get them, which it sounds like is a problem.
Well, and it has been, the thing they brought up in that meeting, like I say, it's been probably 2 years ago now, was just strictly that lots of communities were switching and becoming bear resistant. And so there was just a real rush on them. There was also at that point, and this is again about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, there was even some discussion about not having the designs even pinned down. But as I understand it, that's all been pretty well worked out now. So that was another bit of a delay in some towns.
It has, and this is pretty geeky, but that interagency grizzly bear committee, IGBC, has sponsored tests of different brands of bear-resistant containers. And so part of the health department regulations here is must be an IGBC certified container. So people can certainly purchase their own, but it has to be both IGBC certified, and it also has to work with the equipment that the household garbage hauler uses. So for instance, people who are on an automated route, that garbage truck has to be able to go out and pinch it and dump it. So those are the two considerations for people who would like to purchase their own.
Good. Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it. Jenny Merriam, the City Communications Director and our stand bear expert tonight. Oh, Jack, one more.
We haven't dealt with compost. Are we dealing with compost? In terms of bear? Yeah, they're not required to. And this is a new thing in Missoula. It's been, you know, I can think in my neighborhood, I've seen the trucks for probably 3 or 4 years, maybe a little bit longer. But there wasn't ever a requirement when they even started a business, and we knew this was coming down the pipe. And I'm wondering if what is trying to be done, if there's any goals to get the compost also bear resistant.
Good question.
That is a good question, and I do not know actually where we are with that, but it certainly, I mean, that has to happen.
Yeah.
So Missoula compost collection, I think you could technically say, according to these regulations, that it would be classified as a garbage hauler, really, so.
Well, we'll do some research on that.
Yeah.
I think that's our topic. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In all of that verbiage, you know, that this is only that the garbage situations is about 50% of the problem, that compost is another major problem, that recycling not washed is another problem. All the recycling is supposed to be washed. And then it, you know, mentioned some other things like gardens and bird feeders and other minutia type things that I know the bear agencies are working with as far as picking up fruit and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll do some research on that. Jack, thanks for your questions. Really good. And Jenny,
Yeah,
thank you.
great
And
questions.
we'll be doing more on bears, I think, next time around from the sound of it.
I mean,
So
maybe that should be our next topic.
I think that is. That'll be up to you, Mayor. You can decide that. Question. Go ahead and stand up. Give us your name, please.
My name's Amanda, and you mentioned a second ago about deed-restricted housing.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about urban development in urban districts, am I understanding that that means a person would own a unit or a condo, but the trust would own the land?
So not in all cases, but in the particular example I used with the Scott Street development and the community land trust.
Okay.
So those are two separate things that can also work together. Okay. So a deed restriction is basically something like rent restriction. Or let's use that as an example. So if something was built with public subsidy and equity that helped pay for the construction, you would set the rent maybe at a certain area median income. People that are earning their wages here in this library, for example, 60 or 80% of the area median income. That's deed restricted, meaning that actually on the deed, the title itself, it says you can't rent to anybody above this. And a community land trust is where the land is held in trust. And you can just do that and then sell these without any additional deed restriction. It's that the community land trust, as a buyer, we have a ground lease, right? If I was to buy a home, I would have a ground lease with that community land trust. And the idea behind it is that you are creating more affordable entry points into home ownership. And so there is actually quite a system that helps basically what's called like an equity cap, So those homes aren't going through the roof, and other people that might be earning moderate wages can then get into those homes when that other person sells. So I'm sorry for the complexity. I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, no,
because
it
these
does.
things can be coupled
Yeah,
together.
yeah. I was just wondering if that's our goal. More of that coupled with mixed use, like you said, as we're trying to figure out this housing issue in Missoula. Like, is the end goal for this use of space in each district? And yeah.
Yes, and we also need market rate. So one thing that I would say is that we need it all, right? But we do have affordability goals established in the city housing strategy, which is again called A Place to Call Home. And it is something where through data that has been collected through our partners like Missoula Organization of Realtors and others, where we've been able to determine how many homes have gotten built, what is, generally speaking, as much as we can get market data, what are these rents or what are the homes priced at, and then how many homes have been built compared to the demand and the population growth. And then we're constantly trying to identify what our goals are. And, but I would say for sure, the city is committed to using public funds to make sure we're always meeting those community goals. And some of them, again, will be market rate. I mean, we want a wide variety of incomes. We want folks to be able to help afford some of the commercial rents that will actually help those commercial projects that Ellen was talking about that actually generates the tax increment finance.
Thank you very much. And the attachment with that on a deed is not dissimilar from what's been done with various covenants and stuff on deeds too, right? I mean, it's essentially a covenant.
Yep.
I don't know if that's exactly the term, but it's
Right.
similar to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that, where if the property changes, somebody else comes into the mix. This is sort of, but the big objective there is to prevent or at least give us opportunities that have some parameters.
That's
I
right.
guess the best way to put it, right?
Yep.
So if a developer came in, worked on a particular site, 10 years from now, prices go even higher. We've at least preserved some opportunities there in a certain, tied to a certain parameter.
Exactly. And this is generationally, if you think about the last several decades, of course, our housing market was so different. There were programs that we were passing through the federal government that were helping people buy their first home. And a lot of times, folks would be able to obtain that grant, let's say, or low interest loan, and then they might be able to just sell with a massive equity gain. And then as a community, we sort of lose that resource. And over time, we've realized, okay, if we're going to put public dollars into these assets, really, and again, I think of it as infrastructure for the people that work here, then we need to make sure that we have an ability to not be lost in that first generation.
Kind of preserve that mix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. We talk about bears and whitefish. I mean, if you talk about real estate and whitefish, classic case of where you have, what was historically Stumptown.
Yes.
Right? It was a logging community and this and that. Now you
Yes.
have them, and they've had some challenges trying to meet those two ends of the spectrum. It really, you got tools are interesting. Try to get through those changes.
You have to be intentional.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll go ahead. We're at our time here now, and we want to really one more question. Sure, let's do it. Go ahead and stand up. Okay.
My name is Kay. But I have a question of what is the source of the money that is being spent to clean up these homeless camps? Is that just something that only the town of Missoula has to pay? Do other local communities pay anything to that? Where's that? I just read in the Missoulian $138,000 was spent cleaning up homeless camps. I kind of resent that when I'm looking around at these outrageous property taxes and we're scooping up homeless tents that move 10 feet down the road and you turn around and do it again. Where does some of this end and where does this money come from?
Yeah. Can I answer this question first? Okay. So that money is generally out of our general fund, which is our tax dollars. We've also used grants to do the same kind of work, but there's not a lot of money for that, so we are using general fund dollars. And it's a health and safety issue. I mean, we can't let garbage pile up. We have to be able to clean this up. I just came from a 5-hour urban camping working group It's something that I was very interested in helping the city council develop an updated ordinance as it relates to people that are living unsheltered and outside. And we are on the 3rd working group. There will be up to 5. And we have a number of different interested community members there, including folks that are living unhoused, but social service providers, business representatives there, to come up with some solutions that help us basically mitigate the challenge that you're talking about. Yes, every city I know of in the state of Montana is dealing with this. This is a national issue. Everywhere is having the same challenge. Absolutely.
By bedroom communities, you mean like, it's just Missoula?
No, Missoula County actually funds the temporary safe outdoor space, which is located on West Broadway. So absolutely, Missoula County is doing its part. It also, in partnership with the city, helped fund the emergency shelter at the Johnson Street shelter. So actually, multiple taxing jurisdictions are working on this. Who we need more participation from is actually at the state level. We need help at the state and federal level to be dealing with an enormous systemic issue. Homelessness is where there are, if you've probably heard the term that's used quite a bit now, which is called intersectionality. It is all of these different systems that have come crashing into this situation, which is why it is such a national and international issue that we're dealing with.
But there are some people that choose to live if they want alcohol, drugs, and whatever else. They choose to live that way and then make a big mess that we pay to go clean up. I'm sorry, I'm very resentful of that. I don't want my money spent that way.
I would love for you to come and participate in some of the work that we're doing. In fact, on April 4th, there will be an open house at the Missoula Community Theater. The City of Missoula has already planned and retired its first set of plans to help address homelessness. And then it will be putting its next community-led plan together. And we will be inviting members of the public to participate in a stakeholder group, but just come learn about what we are planning. And there are service providers there to help answer some of the questions it sounds like you really have around what are leading causes of homelessness and what are some of the things that we can do around that.
What was the date again for that, April 4th?
It's April 4th from
Okay.
6 to 8 p.m. and it will be at the Missoula Children's Theater.
Okay. All right, final question here. Go ahead and give us your name, please.
My name is Barbara Poley, and I am the Urban Renewal District 3, and I'm in the Midtown group, and I'm also a member of the Southgate Triangle team. And I was going to give you a profile of our neighborhood to give to the mayor, and invite her to come to our quarterly or our semi-annual meeting at Child Life Center on April 10th. It's a Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
Okay, I'll look at my calendar. I would love to.
And then I had a couple other items, and I'll try to keep them brief. The encampment costs that were in the budget, I was reviewing the budget, was $421,000 already. And then one of the other things was on the levy on the fire department. I was encouraging you possibly to separate out the building from the firemen and use bond issue for the building, and levies are always permanent, whereas a bond issue expires after 20 to 30 years. So as a way of trying to reduce the cost to the taxpayers, I would like to make that suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Southgate's a really, we just finished up writing up a big series over the radio station about all the Missoula neighborhoods, and I just did the one on Southgate Triangle.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to look at the statistics and how things have changed and the investment, and it's pretty interesting. So that's a great location. So we'll give this, pass this along,
Please.
and there's your invitation.
Thank
so,
you.
Again, want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Big round of applause for the mayor and for our staff for being here to answer some questions. And sounds like we might be doing bears next time around. So
There's a good
I'm fine
chance
with
of
that,
it.
Jack. Thanks for that suggestion. We were all leaning in that same direction. So as long as we don't
Good timing.
long as we don't invite the bears to the meeting for comment, I think we're okay. We want to thank everybody for being here tonight for Wednesdays with the Mayor. We want to thank Mayor Davis for your time, especially after a long afternoon of working on the homeless issue. Thank you very much. I want to thank our staff from MCAT, too, for providing this. Remember, the replay of this is always available on the MCAT YouTube channel. And we encourage you to go back and share that with your friends and invite them to next time. We'll be here on the 4th Wednesday here at the Missoula Public Library. I'm Dennis Bragg. Thanks for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor.
Thank you, Dennis. Always.